They're telling Detroit stories and why they matter. Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Laurel Hess, coming to you from the Detroit Historical Museum in the city's Cultural Center Historic District in Midtown Detroit, and this is COMCAST Newsmakers. Joining me now is the Senior Curator of the Detroit Historical Society, Joel Stone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Laurel. Happy to be here.
You oversee so much as the Senior Curator of the Society, but I know you have a passion for one particular vehicle that is actually part of a larger collection of vehicles that you're particularly passionate about.
We have about 65 cars in our collection, and this one is one of my favorite. It's many of our cars are historic, many of them are unusual prototypes, many of them were owned by famous people, and this one kind of falls into all of those categories. The Stout Scarab was developed by William Bushnell Stout. Most people knew him as Bill. And he was a real inventive mind, one of those fellows who thinks out of the box all the time. Started his career as a journalist and eventually moved into critiques of the aeronautics, the planes they were building at the time, and then he had the opportunity to actually start building airplanes. He's probably best known as the guy who was the first designer of a metal single-winged airplane in the world, and kind of out of those experiments came the Ford Trimotor, which at the time was the most famous, the most reliable plane you could have, built right here in Detroit. Henry Ford was one of his sponsors. The guy was doing all kinds of things, and when Henry Ford bought him out, he had the opportunity to start building cars. The Stout Scarab he built kind of using that aeronautic technology. It's got an exoskeleton, hence he came up with the name the Scarab.
So, and this was obviously back in 1935, just so everybody knows this is, and you said it was and maybe you didn't say, but a prototype vehicle. Were any of them ever manufactured?
There were only 9 manufactured, and each one is slightly different. They're all hand-built cars. They were a rear-engine vehicle in a time when all the cars had motors in the front. A very long wheelbase, which made it very comfortable. Unusual spring and strut system, but also things we recognize today as being very inventive, like electronic door openers and air conditioning, back in a time when none of the other cars had that. Because it had its engine in the rear, it didn't have that transmission tunnel that all cars had back then. So its cabin is very wide open. It's got a table and chairs you can move around and sit up however you want, kind of reminiscent of the minivans that came along 50 years later.
And why, so you're so passionate about this vehicle, you're actually in the process right now of writing a book about, you called him Bill Stout, this inventor. Why the interest, the particular interest in him and his life and this story?
He's just a neat guy in that whatever he did, and he grew up, he could be everyone's favorite nerd. He grew up, he was very unathletic, he could hardly see, had a real eyesight
the Bill Gates
problems.
of 1935.
Kind of, yeah. And because he never let people tell him it couldn't be done. So if somebody told him it couldn't be done, he went out and did it.
Well, then how come we know Henry Ford's name today, but we don't know his?
I think Henry Ford made a lot more money. Bill Stout did very well for himself, but really his name has gotten lost in time. He worked on things besides automobiles, besides the airplanes. He developed railroad cars for the Pullman Company, single and longer versions of the same thing. Again, an exoskeleton, making them very light. They ran on gasoline engines instead of either electricity or diesel. He was just experimenting with all kinds of things.
And then very quickly, where can folks come see this vehicle?
Detroit Historical Museum on Woodward in the Cultural Center.
All right, awesome, very cool. And while they're here, they can see a whole lot more as well and learn all about that story. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
For more information on today's topic, you can visit DetroitHistorical.org. Today's COMCAST Newsmaker was Joel Stone, the Senior Curator of the Detroit Historical Society.